Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain. Just south of Area 51, my name is Ryan, the original overseer of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode today. We have a good one. On today's episode, we have the returning guest, MG Stevens. This is MG's second time on the podcast, but she's bringing it this time. She's bringing something different this time around. A book by the name The Boogeyman Chronicles, which she has had published since her last time here. It is important to mention MG Stevens also hosts her own popular podcast, The Boogeyman Chronicles, a podcast I have had the pleasure of appearing on. MG and I share many beliefs when it comes to high strangeness, but we come at the situation from different cultural viewpoints at times. It's always fun speaking with MG, and I don't see why today would be any different with a fresh book on the market, The Amazing Boogeyman Chronicles, and the amazing Boogeyman Chronicler, MG Stevens. Welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be great. This book is a really fun read, and it's something that I've caught myself reading twice. So what originally inspired you to write the book? I
have no idea, actually. It was just a thing. I just sat down and just kind of realized, like, I don't know. I think maybe doing the podcast that I'm doing, I started to realize I started having a lot of similarities with my guests. And I kept saying, oh, yeah, me too. And I found myself kind of, at times, like, cutting into, not trying to. I felt kind of terrible about that. But I would sometimes cut into their time by telling half of my story and be like, oh, no, it's your time. You know what I mean? And so I kind of took that whole thing where, my whole entire life I've been really private. I haven't said anything about the paranormal. I keep it to myself. And I've just been real quiet about it. I'm just real private. I just don't go, I don't start talking about this kind of stuff and, just randomly. So I don't know. It just, of all the handful of times that I have told people stuff through the years, they're like, oh my God, you've got to write a book. You've had a lot of experiences.
Right. Yeah.
And it finally just hit me like, wow, I have had a lot of experiences. I'm going to be 45 in June. And I just realized, like, oh my God, I've had a lifetime of paranormal experiences that, believable or not, really happened. And it just, I don't know, something kind of came over me and said, write that book, just write it and see where it goes. And again, there's times when I was writing where I was like, why am I doing this? Why should I be doing this? Why, I don't like, why am I doing this? I don't normally do stuff like this, but I just felt kind of compelled to do it. So I sat down and wrote everything out, and it was kind of remarkable because I forgot a lot of stuff. I pushed it to the back of my mind. And so sitting there remembering all of this was kind of, interesting. And it was really kind of shocking to me because I was like, wow, I have been through some stuff.
Well, it is. Yeah. It's a great book. Let me jump to one of my favorite parts of the book. I have a few, but one that stood out to me was the case of the Backyard Humanoid. Can we give listeners a rough idea of what was taking place in your life at that moment and how that all went down?
Well, I was really, really, really young when that happened. and it still is a bit of a blur. But I remember we lived on in the South. We lived on a canal, and it was very swampy, and that place was just, from what I remember, it was so paranormally active in the sense that you knew you were on indigenous land.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly feeling like you're being watched. At times it was this curious, sort of like watching you, and I could feel it just playing in the backyard. I'd be like, what the? I felt like there was like a bunch of eyes on me. And I would get freaked out because I thought, because this was, in the time of stranger danger. And so, everybody was afraid.
Yeah, for those that don't remember that's that was another time for sure.
Yeah, it was during the early 80s, and, Adam Walsh had been kidnapped, and I remember there was just a lot of missing children's cases really came to the forefront, and this is when we started having missing pictures on milk cartons, and you know what I mean, like all of this stuff. So there was a lot of
it was horrible. It was boys, girls, at variety of ages. It was just like such a panic for parents.
Yeah, it was it was such a terrifying time, and I remember, parents were terrified. Like it was like a total loss of innocence at that time, because I think a few years prior, maybe people were just oblivious, or we just just kind of didn't think about it, but we didn't really realize how many kids were going missing. Or how many predatory people are out there too. That kind of like woke everyone up. So there was this kind of constant fear hovering over everyone, and I remember playing out in the backyard and just getting super creeped out about stuff. I was just like, oh my God, someone is watching me. And I remember I lived in kind of a wooded area to where someone could be there watching me, and, but it felt like a lot of eyes. Mm-hmm. It felt like I was on someone else's land, and it was just kind of felt like I was encroaching. And I would get so freaked out, I would run back inside, and I would play in there for a while. And that had its own bit of strangeness as well. I remember one night, my middle sibling, and I and some of her friends were home, and we had this very expansive backyard. And like I said, it could get very creepy back there easily. There was a lot of wooded areas. It was just very scary at times. Mm-hmm, and I remember all of a sudden I hear, "What's that? Oh my God, what's that?" And just panic. And just people running to and fro from one window to another. Should we call the police? What should we do? Who is that? What is that? And it was just this creepy figure that we could see standing in the backyard just watching. And, there was no fences, and it was just terrifying. And I just remember, when you're a little kid and the adults are terrified, or the people taking care of you are terrified, then you're terrified. So I remember just standing by a window and just watching this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't get much of a feeling from it. It was just there. And eventually it just went away. But it was terrifying, I don't even know what to make of it,
And, shortly around the Backyard Humanoid event, the paranormal just ramped up in your life, and some of it was malicious paranormal activity. Can we go into some of those events and the presence that, you could sense as a kid? As a kid, it seems like, but yeah, you could sense a presence, couldn't you?
Yeah, everywhere I went. This is when, I wish I had known, but again, we were in more innocent times of that time, and, nowadays there's books and podcasts and web series and blah, 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 and shows everywhere about the paranormal, where there wasn't that much back in the early, late 70s, early 80s. So I didn't have anything to go by. I didn't know. And so I was constantly, at that point, I was starting to become aware of my surroundings. And it was very strange because here I am, a human person on planet Earth, trying to I'm growing up, I'm learning to deal with people, and I'm also neurodivergent, I'm autistic, and I have ADHD, so I'm trying to, understand the world around me on a different level. And then yet on another level, I have this ESP and I don't know what to make of it. And of course, I'm kind of wondering, does everyone see these things? Does everyone feel these things? Am I the only one? So I was constantly, walking, say, into a room in a house or being out with my sibling and their friends. And, I was there, but I wasn't there. I was there talking to the people, interacting, but yet I constantly felt something on the back of my neck, or I was aware of another presence, different things. Something was there, and it was weird. It was like I was there, but I wasn't there. I remember, for some reason, I guess because I was a scared little sensitive kid, whatever was around, if it was malicious, it found me, and like a human would bully me. And there are such things as paranormal bullies. And I've talked to so many people since who had the same thing. They said, I don't know what was in this house that I lived in, but it just loved to torture me. And it did it every night. And it did it all day long. If I was watching TV, then something was pulling my hair or something like that. And the same thing happened to me. It happened as early as 2 years old, where, wherever I went, if there was something malicious, it definitely found me. And I remember my first encounter with something really hideously malicious was in my stepmother's condo. Mm-hmm. And it was immediately, I don't know how to explain it other than it just saw me. It just kind of had me in its sights. It was just like ready to torture me. And it did that every single night for years and years and years. And even during the day, I would hear stuff or feel things. I was constantly tormented by whatever this thing was. I don't know if it was demonic. It felt evil, but it didn't feel demonic. It was weird because certain entities have different energy signatures. And I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt evil, but not demonic. But it definitely felt like it had it out for me.
Yes. And can we discuss that? I'm assuming you're talking about the Lion's Den when you were living with your dad. And if it's okay, can I read an excerpt of that?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, it's awesome the way you put this. The nightly torture sessions continued and the activity escalated. Such good wording. Can we explain the events leading to that impish creature if possible? And man, the hissing, oh my, I mean, anywhere is a good place, wherever is good for you to start.
Okay. Well, when I was little, from about 2 to about 8 years old, I would just visit my dad and his wife. And I would be tormented, whenever I was there. But when I turned about 8 years old, my mother lost her business. I had to go live with my dad and his wife. And I walked up into that apartment, just completely wrecked, knowing full well, oh boy, this is it. You know what I mean? Whatever this thing is here. Because at this point I don't know how to say it, but
people will have to read the book. They have to read the book.
Yeah. It was, at this point, by the time I was 8 years old, of constant being tortured by this thing, it was like I knew, like in school, like you dread going to school because you're going to see that bully. It was like that. It had that same sinking dread of like, oh God, I'm now moving into the apartment or condo that has the thing. And I knew I was right there where it wanted me to be. And I remember at night, it was just all night long, just constant torture. And I remember one night I was constantly being awakened by something. It was, either noise or the bed sheets would be ripped off, the bed would be, kicked or something, shook. And I was just like, that's it. So I decided one night, I was probably about almost 9. I decided, okay, that's it. I'm going to go out in the living room. I don't know where I got this idea from because it's the same apartment. Like I'm just going to another room. Like it's, But I figure since I'm going to be closer to my parents' room, that I'm safer, right? That's guess what my 8-year-old brain was thinking. So I sat down on the couch and I looked at the clock and realized I had just a few more hours before school started and the alarm was going to go off. So I laid down thinking, okay, I'm going to get a few hours of sleep and then I'll hear the alarm because I would get in trouble if I was sleeping on the couch. So I was like, well, if I hear the alarm, I'll get up and then I'll go get ready and pretend like I was always in my room. So I remember I doze off. I'm laying on the couch and in no time at all, something jumps on me. And to this day, I didn't see it, but it actually had weight to it. And I could feel its arms. And I remember I could feel something over my eyes and something over my nose and mouth. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't breathe. And I'm trying to scream. And this thing is not letting me breathe. And I'm gasping for air. I'm biting this thing. Because, I mean, it literally is in my face, hissing at me. It's just hissing like a scared animal or something, or a mad animal, like a cornered animal. And it kept hissing in my face. I could feel the breath on my face. And I could feel the weight of this thing. And it was probably no more than about 2 or 3 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And this thing, and I'm a little kid, and this thing is literally holding me down. I'm gasping for my last breath at this point. I'm running out of air. I'm done. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. All of a sudden I hear in my head, grab it by its arms and throw it down. And I'm like, arms? I don't, I'm freaking out because I've got something, and I thought it was a person. And I still remember I could see underneath the hands, and I'm not seeing anything, but I'm thinking this is a person who snuck in or something, because I could feel the weight of it on me. And so I'm thinking it's a person. No person. I can't see anything. But I remember hearing, grab it by its arms and throw it down. And I'm like, okay. So I reach up, and I'm not kidding you. I could feel little spindly arms and in my hands. And I remember something said, no, throw it down. And I threw it down. And this thing, I didn't see it again. There was enough light in the room to where I could see something, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see anything. And I remember this thing went scampering away, hissing, snarling all the way. I don't know where this thing went. I sat there gasping for air, freaking out, and just looking everywhere for this thing, thinking, did it go under the couch? Where did it go? And I'm looking everywhere for it because, I'm what just happened? It was kind of like, what was that, Cat's Eye or something?
Yes, exactly what I was just thinking. Oh my gosh, yeah.
It was like that. It was like, where did this thing, because again, I didn't see anything, but maybe it does have a form. It had to. It was weighted, and I'm not even kidding you. I looked and looked and looked for this thing because that movie was out around that time, and I'm thinking, okay, some little goblin just came in. You know what I mean? But I couldn't find it. And I remember just being terrified. I didn't know what to do because if I went into my parents' room, I would get yelled at. So I didn't want to go back in my room. And I didn't want to turn on any lights because then I would wake someone up. And so I just sat there going, what the F just happened to me? And I remember, trying not to wake my parents, but yet being terrified of every little sound that, whatever this thing was, it would come back. What's going to happen next? I never knew. I lived constantly on eggshells. And so, I stayed up for the rest of the night. It was probably around 5 or so. And I stayed up till about 7. I just sat there hugging my knees, looking all around, wondering what the hell just happened. That was one of the top scariest things I've ever been through.
Yeah. And as adults, we don't realize we need our sleep. We need to go to work. As kids, this is, how many sleepless nights do kids have? And in my opinion, we're a lot more in touch with our authentic self, if you will, when we're children. And in my opinion, also, you sum up a lot of the feelings a lot of folks, including myself, have about the paranormal. And especially as children, is it okay if I read a short excerpt from the book? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it says, when you experience the paranormal on any level, it is mind-blowing, life-changing, and sometimes earth-shattering. It is a world said not to exist, yet here it is, coming into your world, and you're left to cope, many times all alone with no one to turn to for help. And that's the way a lot of experiencers feel. A darn good description and great words. I was floored when I read this. And, you know, there's a lot that goes into it. The Boogeyman Chronicles, your book, what I like about it is it just kind of sticks to the meat. It does not go down. It's not very tangential. It just really hammers it down. And let's get into that. Like, there's probably a lot of people that deal with this and don't even come forward.
There's many people out there. I've talked to so many people who, you know, like I said, I don't really talk about the paranormal in my past, but on the rare occasion that it would come up, I would have inevitably someone would say, "Oh yeah, I had this encounter when I was 10 and I never said anything to anybody and I've kept it secret." And I can't tell you how many paranormal podcasts I personally, and I know you personally and everyone else out there has listened to, where someone said, "Yeah, I had this encounter and I never told anybody." So you can imagine the you know, millions of people out there from all walks of life, from all ages, countries, different, you know, just different backgrounds, who have had some sort of brush with the paranormal, the unexplained, and it completely threw their world upside down. And they either suppressed it or it tormented them. They couldn't suppress it or what have you, but they never said anything, either because they knew they wouldn't be believed or they were scared of ridicule. I knew a lady who just came forward just recently, and she said, "Yeah, I just had I had a paranormal encounter when I was stationed, UFO encounter when I was stationed in the Air Force, and it was 20-something years ago, and I've never told anybody." So, you'll be surprised at how many people will come forward and say, "Hey, yeah, I remember you told me about your story. I had an encounter too." And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking. And this is why I want to, I think one of the reasons why I did want to get my story out there and I do my podcast is because I'm trying to normalize paranormal encounters. There's so many of them, and you may have one little encounter, but that's still valid. That's still an encounter, and you shouldn't be afraid or ashamed. You should be able to share that without any judgment. And if someone is, that's their problem. If someone wants to be judgy and skeptical and rude, that's their problem. But I want to create kind of a safe space for paranormal encounters or whatever, people that have encountered stuff that are afraid to talk. And I want people to feel like they can come to me, my podcast, or, me writing a book or something like that. I will absolutely keep people anonymous if that's what they want. But sometimes getting stuff off your chest is so therapeutic, and I want to, again, normalize paranormal encounters and just be like, yeah, this is what happened to me. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to figure it out. Just talk. Just get it out, and that's kind of what I hope to do in my sort of new role, as it were, now that I have this podcast and I am writing more books. I just want people to feel safe in coming out and saying, what they've been through. I mean, and it could be just the tiniest little thing, but they something happens when you verbalize a trauma or something, and it really it's quite therapeutic. So I really just want to help more people like me who suffered a lot from paranormal encounters because they didn't have anyone to turn to. They didn't know who to tell. And they can tell me, they can tell my podcast or not, or just write in. Sometimes, you have people write in and say, "Hey, look, don't publish this, but I just got to get this off my chest." And it's like, cool, absolutely. So, you know what I mean? I see the benefit in getting these things off your chest, and that's just kind of what I want to do, just create a safe space for people who are suffering with paranormal PTSD. It is a real thing.
Yeah, and it is something that I believe when verbalized, like you said, it expands your power. It lets you go into an area that it's important to bring them up. And let's go into some of the areas that people usually, like you said, have these things happen and then they don't want to discuss them. And something I'm sure you knew I would ask about is the foot monster. Can we explain to listeners the events surrounding and the experience with the foot monster?
Well, this was when I was still very little. I was about 2 or 3 years old, 4 around there. And the nightly torment was just something I expected every single weekend when I went to visit my dad and his wife. It was like, that's what happened. I closed my eyes barely on those weekend nights, knowing full well that I was not going to sleep well. I didn't sleep hardly at all as a kid. And I remember some of the torment was the bed shaking, the covers being ripped off, the sheets just go flying. I remember having something lay down next to me. I remember hearing sounds, feeling whispering, even the breath on my face, in my ear, terrifying stuff. And I remember one of the things that whatever this thing was doing, whatever it was, full on had some sort of like long, jagged fingernails, because at night my feet were, and I would sleep with bare feet, and something would just grab my feet repeatedly throughout the night. I would just start to kind of doze off, just start to get into some sort of peaceful sleep, and then scratch. Something was with really jagged nails was just clawing at my feet. And I finally got so freaked out. My little 4-year-old brain was like, I know, I'll wear socks and maybe that'll stop it.
Sure.
I didn't know any better, so I wore socks, and that kind of stopped it for a little bit. So I was like really excited that I kind of won one. You know what I mean? I was like, yeah, okay, whatever this thing is, I foiled it. And I remember telling my dad and stepmom, I remember telling them that I had to wear socks to bed, and they were like, why? And I said, I didn't know any better. I was just like, well, there's a foot monster, and he's constantly after my feet. So if I wear these socks, then the foot monster can't get me. And of course, they thought that was hilarious. They laughed and laughed and laughed. And I'm like, no, you guys don't understand. I have something tormenting me. And of course, both of them did not believe in the paranormal. And, I got ridiculed and laughed at because I guess it sounded adorable, but it was based out of survival. I had to wear socks because if I forgot, even one night, then these jagged fingernails would come back, and it was just terrifying. So.
And that's something that happened to me as well as a child. Shamelessly, I have to admit that. But you've had some amazing gifts early on, which are outlined in the book. Can we tell the story of when you knew something was wrong with your dad and your mom called in? It was pretty amazing. You had these gifts.
Yeah, I've always been able to, I know when someone's talking about me, good or bad. I know when someone's thinking about me, good or bad. I know when someone's about to call me, text me, email me. I know sometimes when I'm like living with someone, I know when they're, like say they go to the grocery store and they're just about, like they're coming back and they're just about to walk in the door. I know when they're coming home from work. It's just a weird tuning into something. And my father and I have always been very tuned in. I've always known when he was going through something. And at this point in the story in my life, I had moved in with my mom again. I was about 14 years old. And we were out in the backyard and we were just talking about, this or that, something completely unrelated. All of a sudden I get this rush of panic, fear. Oh my God, something's wrong. And I kept seeing my dad's face, and I kept seeing an ambulance at the same time. And I immediately panicked. I didn't know how to filter those sorts of things back then. Now I can go, okay, something's happening to Dad, and there's this thing, and blah, blah, blah. But at that time, I was so young, and it was just so, I was, just getting like to where I was starting to realize, oh, I have abilities, you know what I mean? So I had no idea. And I remember it was so, it bowled me over. It was so powerful that it wasn't just a little hint of something. It was like someone came over, it like knocked me over. That's how like strong it was. And I remember just panicking. And I remember looking at my mom, and I remember I probably looked like I'd seen a ghost, but I looked at her and started screaming, "Mom, Mom, call Dad, something's wrong, call Dad." And I was so paralyzed by what I was feeling because it was so numbing. It was so terrifying that I kind of went numb, and I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't do anything. I could barely walk. I could barely breathe. It was just, it was the most terrifying feeling. And I said, Mom, please call Dad, something's wrong. And she tried to calm me down because she thought I was having an anxiety attack. And I said, no, this is something else. This isn't me. This is something else. And she said, okay. So we ran into the house, and we had a landline, a rotary phone landline. And she went over, and my dad was still working at a office building downtown. And so she called that office, and she said, "Where's so-and-so?" And the guy, my dad's coworker, hung up on her, and he hung up on me. She started screaming. She got so mad. She called him again. She said, "Where is he? Don't you dare hang up on me." And then my dad's coworker said, his wife just got into a deadly accident, and he's on his way to the hospital. So, yeah, I had picked up on all of that.
It's pretty amazing. And this is something I believe you have found along with scores of other experiencers, and that is that this sort of thing can follow people. And is it your opinion, or where do you sit on this subject? Does this activity follow you no matter where you're at a little bit?
I think it's just me. I think especially, and I'm writing another book on it, but there is a tie between neurodivergency and ESP. Not all the time. Not every psychic is neurodivergent. Not every neurodivergent person is psychic, but there is a definite correlation between those two for a lot of people. I was actually talking to Kathleen Martin, who was the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. Mm-hmm. And she is an expert researcher and very thorough. And I asked her, I said, what is the percentage of experiencers who are neurodivergent, who have seen UFOs, have, some sort of encounter? She said it's a good 86%. That's a huge number. And so, as I mentioned in the book, my mother and I are both neurodivergent. We both had these abilities, and I honestly think it's just electrical. I think we're wired in a certain way to where we pick up on other frequencies, if you will. And so, for me, it's not so much it follows me. I think because sometimes we get into that mentality of we go to a place and then we have paranormal, and sometimes, that is the case. Things will follow you home. For me, on the other hand, no matter where I go, no matter where I'm at, I'm on a plot of land, I'm outside, I'm in a house, I'm in an apartment, if there is something paranormal there, I will pick up on it because I am just wired that way,
And I like that you say it that way. I like that you say wired, because it seems like experiencers, the activity is often described that way in this subject matter. And let's get into grays, what they may or may not be, and your personal experiences with them.
Well, as far as grays, I have never personally seen one or had any encounter with one. I did have a UFO encounter when I was about 18. My mother, though, had an encounter, and she swore for years and years, decades, that she had a dream. No, it's just a dream. It's just a dream. Mm-hmm. But my mother was a spiritually formidable, and just formidable, and just she was so feisty and southern and tough, and she would break up fights. She was a tiny little woman, all of 5'6" or so, but she would just, I've seen her getting right in people's faces. Don't you dare hurt that dog. Don't you dare hurt that person. You guys go to your corners. I've seen her do all kinds of stuff. She's put herself in the middle of fights and, everything. And she's always been the peacemaker. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, people always respected my mom, and they always looked up to her, and they always listened to her. You could have this big, mean guy, and she could talk him down. I've seen her talk people out of suicide. I've seen her talk to drug addicts, with needles in their arms. I mean, she just loved people and, was always there and was never scared. She was never scared, ever. I mean, she was like the most toughest person I've ever met. And so in the late 60s, way before Whitley Strieber's Communion, Close Encounters, any of that, anything before, a good decade or so before any sort of, gray-like encounters were kind of vernacular, kind of everyday, mundane, pedestrian kind of talk. She had what she thought was a dream. And the dream was she found herself on a ship. And there was a very tall gray. It was at least 6 feet tall or taller. It was wearing a blue robe, like tunic type outfit. She said it looked just like a robe. It folded over and had like a belt, and it had bell sleeves on it. And she said it was a blue shimmery fabric. And she told me, she said this fabric did not look like anything I had ever seen on Earth. And my mother used to make my siblings clothes. So she was fairly familiar with fabric. And we're talking the 60s, so, I don't know what kind of fabric they had back then, but, mostly cotton, I guess. But she said that this fabric that this robe was made out of looked like metal. It looked like a form of metal. She said it shimmered and moved in a way that didn't look like anything she had ever seen on Earth. And this gray was wearing some sort of insignia, kind of like a general would, the sort of bars on its lapel to signify, I guess, she had my mother's impression, what she told me, was that this gray was higher ranking than the other grays, and it was female. And I know we don't assign genders to these things, but she just got that impression. So she said this thing was, for lack of a better word, giving her a tour of the ship, and it was showing her around. And she said it put something in her hand, like the size of a coaster that you would put your drink on, but it was like this metal disc, and it looked very much like the seal of the United States. And she, with the eagle and the shield and everything, and she exclaimed to this gray, "Oh my gosh, that's what we have back home. That looks very similar." She then remembers walking into a lift, an elevator, and she says she was in this elevator with the gray. The elevator door opens up just like a Star Trek, she said. It was like, psh, and this was before Star Trek. So my mom said that she and this gray walked into this room that was dimly lit. There was like little seats, and there was this control panel. And she's remembered everything being very smooth and very brushed metal, like kind of like stainless steel appliances, kind of just very brushed metal, smooth. There was no knobs or levers or anything protruding. There was no buttons. There was nothing like that. And she remembers this gray walking over to a control panel of sorts. And my mom said, with its long, skinny fingers, it went like this and just kind of moved its hand, glided its hand over this control panel. And the control panel lit up, and the whole entire room lit up, and it powered, like, whatever this craft was, it just powered it right up. And my mom said once she saw that, she snapped out of her stupor, her, like, awestruck stupor, and started screaming and losing it and telling this gray, "I want to go home. I want to go home. Please take me home. I don't want to be here anymore." And the gray, gently and calmly told her, "We're not here to hurt you. We don't mean any harm. You're safe. You're fine. You're protected. You're okay." And she was like, no. And my mom was at this point inconsolable, because she said that as soon as she saw what power these things wielded, if it goes like this with its hand and completely powers up everything, she was like, what could it do to me? And so she was scared for her life at this point. So she was screaming and screaming, "Please take me home. Please take me home." And she then remembers waking up in her bed, sitting up, and for a second she was kind of out of it. And then she says she remembers jumping up on the bed, and there was a window above my parents' bed, and she said she jumped up on the bed and parted the curtains to see if there was a crack outside. So my mom she said after that she just had the creepiest feeling, like she was being watched. and she sometimes would go to bed with like a butcher knife. She would be really scared after that, but she kept telling herself, it's just a dream, just a weird dream, just a weird dream. And she excused it away. And as I got older, she told me more and more about it. And I kept saying, Mom, I don't think that was a dream. And of course she didn't want to hear that. She was like, no, it's a dream. I said, Mom, I don't think that was a dream. But yeah, I mean, that was my mom's encounter. She had a really, apart from being terrified, had a really nice tour of a spaceship, I guess. And she said the grave was very calm and kind to her. So that was my mom's encounter.
Yeah, it's an amazing one. Let's go into something slightly different, which is astral traveling. What do you think it is, or what is taking place when we believe we are astral traveling?
Oh my goodness, this is one that I've never technically experienced for myself, except for that the couple of times that I was out of body. To be quite honest with you, I think, again, we are electrical. Our hearts function on electrical current. Our brains fire at electrical current. You know what I mean? Everything in our body is electrical.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that's what we are. I think we're just a clump of molecules in a meat bag, in a meat sack, I mean, that's just what we are. We're lugging this meat sack around, and I think we're really just a clump of energy, electrical, static electricity, energy. And I don't know. That's just how I always felt about it. And whatever scientific evidence we have towards that does support that, when people do expire, the electrical charge does leave the body. So, you know what I mean? Maybe it is that. Maybe we are just, clumps of electrical energy. And I think that astral traveling maybe is just that bit leaving the body. I feel like it's able to in some weird way. Again, I don't have all this, answers. My mother astral traveled, and she didn't even try to. You know what I mean? So I think, when we start manifesting things, when we start praying for things and things start happening, or thinking about something that happens, I really believe that there is no distance when it comes to that sort of thing. When it comes, because I always was told by people who believe in prayer, there is no distance in prayer. And I believe it's just whatever it is, whether it's a good thought or prayer, like a full-on prayer, it's just good energy being sent your way. And however that form takes, whether it's electrical energy, whether it's something, in the ether that you put out, I don't know. It's still it's very interesting to talk about. And it's interesting to mull over. But honestly, I don't know what astral travel is, other than, maybe our because people do trance work and astral traveling all the time. So, maybe we can harness our true self, our true nature, our true being. Maybe we can harness those things and project them somewhere. Some people have that kind of control. So I really don't know. I don't have a lot of answers on that. I love talking about it because, I love a mystery. I love a good mystery. When it comes to something like that, I love, getting the facts and saying, okay, we do function on electrical current. So what is that exactly happening here? I mean, are we really dying, or is just a fraction of our energy leaving? I mean, what is it,
Yeah, exactly. And people get divided on, according to what they think is taking place. Let's go into it. It's always enjoyable. I like talking about this stuff because we're both into it. Always enjoyable discussing topics we're both passionate about. Tell our listeners as we wrap up where they can find you, buy the new book, The Boogeyman Chronicles, and keep up with what you're doing.
Well, right now you can find the Boogeyman Chronicles on Amazon. You can, find it pretty much online anywhere. It's pretty much everywhere. It's on Audible as well. And the Boogeyman Chronicles, right now we're still on YouTube. We took a little hiatus, but we are going to come back with more guests and more stories and, try different formats and whatnot. So still, this is still in the experimental phase. But again, I want to hear people's stories. I don't care how insignificant you think they are. You always have a safe safe space with my podcast, with my books and whatnot. I am starting to write more books, and I'm in the process of writing books about indigenous perspective of the paranormal. So if you're indigenous and you have paranormal, and this includes, all, like I was talking on another podcast, there's, the paranormal runs the gamut from scary cryptid, UFO, ghost, demons, whatever, to the visit from grandma. You know what I mean? That's paranormal too.
Yeah.
Grandma comes to you in a dream and says, do this, do that, don't do this, get your life together, whatever. You know what I mean? But that's a paranormal experience as well. So I will take any paranormal encounters. If you're indigenous, also I'm writing another book about military and law enforcement. So if you have been in the military or law enforcement and you've had a paranormal encounter, I would love to hear about it. And also I'm writing another book and gathering stories about neurodivergent. So if you're autistic, have ADHD, and you've had any sort of PTSD, yeah, that too. But if you've had any sort of ESP episodes, whether it be just one or a lifetime, I would love to hear about those as well. So you can get in touch with me at Boogeyman Chronicles at Outlook.com. I would absolutely love to hear your stories and use them in my books because, like I said, I really want to further the discussion on all of these topics and normalize paranormal encounters and take the giggle factor out of them and give people a safe space. And so I really would love to share your stories. And if, you want to remain anonymous, you can absolutely do that. So.
Yeah. And it's so true. What previously in society has been seen as misfortune, notwithstanding like any, unless you're into theology, a lot of times people would have these events take place and they were hammered for being everything from witches and sorcerers to witnessing something that was evil. And the truth is that throughout time, these uninvited entities have entered our space with reckless abandon in a variety of forms, and I know you and I are both passionate about it, but yeah, they can enter our reality or our existence in ways that, your book hammers in so well, like all the different ways that these quote unquote boogeymen can enter our reality and influence us. And I think you got a great podcast going on. I think you have a great thing going on. And yeah, it is something that has always sort of been there in culture, regardless of anybody's culture. These uninvited entities that seem to be from beyond the veil. Nowadays, a lot of things are going down the consciousness route, like this is just us accepting us, viewing us in a different dimension. And it can keep going, but it's so unscripted the way this is going. And I think that the quest is important because we're obviously here for a reason, whether that's a light quest or otherwise. Mm-hmm. And the protocols that I think people are starting to take, is important to have safe spaces like the Boogeyman Chronicles podcast or other places where people can find, some kind of a venue to explain what it is they're taking part in. Because I agree so much with what you said earlier. I can't remember exactly the wording you used, but each experience of each individual really is kind of like a brush stroke in a larger painting. And we can bring them all together. We have a lot better idea what's going on, and it's super important. I'm super excited about your book. I think it's been received very well. And how is everything else going? And what you said you're thinking of writing another book? This is exciting.
I'm actually in the process of gathering stories for 3 more books because I can't just do one thing at a time. That's not how I function, I guess, with my ADHD. But yeah, I mean, I'm working on 3 other books. I want to get the indigenous perspective of the paranormal because it is different. It is viewing the paranormal from a completely different angle. And I don't, when I read paranormal books and stuff like that, I rarely hear from indigenous people. And it's like, where are my people at? You know what I mean? Like, I know there's tons of stories. I have quite a few friends, and they're like, yeah, I was visiting my family on the res and this happened and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of stories indigenous stories out there, and I want to get those stories. People need to hear them. And I want to separate, because there's a weird thing where people think that Native Americans, indigenous people are extra special. They're magical and they fly. And they're like, no, we're people. But I think what it is, and what you and I have discussed before previously, is that when it comes to white culture and indigenous culture, there is a definite cutoff of by the time you're 5 or 6 or so, no more Santa. No more tooth fairy, no more this, no more that. It's time to sort of being practical here. Let's stop with this nonsense. And so anytime if you have if you're like, say, a white person or something, or you're in that sort of world, if you have a paranormal encounter, nope, doesn't exist, doesn't happen. Whereas there's not that separation in indigenous culture for the most part there, unless their culture has been wiped out. But for many tribes, there's so many stories, because there's not that cutoff date of like, okay, no more paranormal encounters, or no more fantastical sort of fantasy things for you. It's time to get practical. You don't have that separation. So again, I think indigenous people, I know from my own experience and from my friends' experiences, is that there is not that sort of like immediate cutoff at 5 or 10 or whatever, that there is no such thing as the paranormal, because it's so permeating in the culture. There's just no separating. So I think that's where people who aren't indigenous kind of get mixed up, where they don't know why indigenous people are having so many encounters or seem so spiritual. And of course, it's how we're portrayed in the media, but there's not a huge separation when it comes to the paranormal. Those sorts of things are commonplace in indigenous culture. So I want to get those stories, and then I'm also very curious, because I did grow up in a law enforcement and military household, and how the paranormal, how military and law enforcement people deal with the paranormal, because again, that's something that doesn't exist, right? And they deal with just the facts. So I love seeing how the paranormal affects people like that, how it really shakes up their world and how they cope with it. It's very interesting to watch. So I want those stories. And of course, I'm writing a book about neurodivergency and ESP. And I put a few comments out there on Facebook, just like, hey, is anyone neurodivergent and have ESP? And wouldn't you know it, I got a million replies of people saying, yeah, I've been psychic or whatever, lack of a better word, my whole life. Or, yeah, I have this weird thing that I can guess people's babies, like the gender of them when they're, still in the womb. And I mean, just interesting, really weird, interesting ESP kind of stuff. And it's just like, wow, there's a lot of us out there. So I want to hear those stories as well. So yeah, I'm in the process of writing 3 more books, and I really would love to hear your stories.
I think that's great. You have such a great viewpoint, and it is such a refreshing alternative to see your ancestry come in and drawn into these belief systems, because I think it's something that it is familiar for many people. And as we wrap up, I won't ask you too much more about what the books are going to be about, but you may have already put the website out there, exactly where people can listen to your podcast and that, but let's put it out there just in case we haven't yet.
Oh yeah. So like I said, right now we're just still on YouTube. We're gonna try to move into Spotify later in the year, but right now just go to YouTube and type in the Boogeyman Chronicles, and we're right there. We have a handful of shows that I'm really proud of. We really try to go in depth into people's stories, because again, I like when it comes to people's stories. I always take Terry Lovelace, because he's a doll. He's such a sweetheart. But
he's awesome.
Every podcast he does, of course, he mostly talks about the Devil's Den incident, and that's great. I wanted to hear that incident, but I also had a sneaking suspicion that he had encounters as a kid, and this was not something that was just an experience that he had in his adult life. This was something that had been building up and sure enough, he did. So I like sweeping the corners when it comes to these people's stories. I like getting to like, okay, what was your very first encounter? What did you see? What did you feel? What happened? And then what happened after that? And then after that? And did you have any weird dreams? Did you know what I mean? I love getting all of the details and just gathering up all together instead of just hitting those high notes. Let's hear the whole story. So our our first guest was Terry, and because we were sweeping all of those corners of his whole life and story, we ended up going like 2.5 hours each time. And so yeah, his podcast with us, or his interviews with us, were quite long, but I really wanted to get all of his story, past, present, and future. So yeah, we got those. And we just recorded with Kathleen Martin. She's a sweetheart and really a wonderful guest, but the audio didn't record. So we have to meet with her again and re-record it. So I was so upset about that because it was such a great interview. But yeah, we've got all kinds of folks. We got you, and we've got Keith Johnson, who was on the Ghost, on TAPS, Ghost Hunters. He was, one of the people on that show. And then we have Paul Eno, who is a very well-versed paranormal investigator. He's been doing this longer than we've been alive. He's been, worked with the Warrens. I mean, he's got tons of stories, tons of books. And we've got Deb Cobble-White, who is just everybody loves Deb. Everybody loves Deb. She's the greatest. She's the sweetest ever. And she'll just, she could talk for hours, and she's wonderful. And so she told us all about her encounters as well, and also her childhood encounters, because she had quite a few. So.
Well, you always try to help people, and it's so amazing the authentic and original people that you meet, whether they're friends, clients. You have struggled to accept your abilities for decades, and it's so good to finally have you helping people, telling everybody. The book got me so stoked, and I appreciate you sharing your terrifying real life journey through the paranormal. And I hope we talk again soon, MG. This has been a great podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And when the other books are getting ready to be released, I'll let you know.
Thank you so much. Have a great one, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. MG Stevens with her new book, The Boogeyman Chronicles, and epic stuff. Great episode tonight. Definitely check out the Boogeyman Chronicles podcast. Read the book, The Boogeyman Chronicles. It's also on Audible. And until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off. Blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off.